Director in the CMA, and I head up our antitrust group. And this is the group which carries out investigations into potential breaches of competition law. So have lots of cases going on in the digital sector at the moment, but I've also run a number of cases looking into what pharmaceutical companies are up to. And last year we imposed fines totaling over £260 million on several pharmaceutical companies who were ramping up prices to the NHS excessively for hydrocortisone tablets, and they were doing that for almost a decade. That case is now on appeal, so it's get to experience litigation if you work in antitrust, but it's a really interesting area along with all the other areas of work that the CMA is involved in. But more importantly for this session, I am also head of the CMA's delivery profession, and I'm really delighted that our delivery graduate scheme has now reached its third year of operation. Our graduates, along with all our staff, are really highly valued, and we're so pleased with the contribution they have made to the CMA's work since we first started the scheme a couple of years ago. I participated in a similar type of programme, I'm not going to tell you how many years ago, but quite a number of years ago, which is becoming a member of the Government Economic Service, and that really helped me early on in my career. On that programme, I moved roles on a regular basis during the first few years of my career, and that exposed me to different areas of work and different departments. And I was also funded to take an academic qualification, which for me was a master's in economics. So I'm pleased that these opportunities are now something that the CMA is offering via our graduate scheme. And it was while I was a member of the GEF programme that I first worked for the CMA's predecessor organisation, the Office of Fair Trading. And I found that I really enjoyed competition law and basically never went back to my parent department. So I've been working for many years now for the OFT and then for the CMA when the OFT and the MMC were combined, I think getting on for 8 years ago now, or even longer. So quite a time. But during that time, I've progressed from the HEO or case officer grade and am now a senior director at the CMA. And one of the reasons I've stayed so long at the OFT and then the CMA is really the nature and the quality of the work. It is really great to be working for an organisation where you feel you are doing some good, trying to protect UK consumers, open up markets for businesses, and generally try to drive productivity in the economy. I really do feel like we are making a difference. And that can be through enforcing the law, which is the primary objective of my role, reviewing markets which aren't working well, or giving advice to government and on various issues like subsidy control and the working of the internal market. And soon we will be doing that on digital markets as well. So the work is really quite challenging at times. The cases can last a long time, but they are stretching, but hugely satisfying when you reach a successful conclusion. And our work is also varied and engaging. Throughout my time at the CMA, I've worked on lots of interesting cases, including in the pharmaceutical sector. As I say, at the moment, I'm investigating Google and Meta and Amazon, all the big digital companies, and recently concluded a case that involves software for schools. So there is a huge variety of issues and markets that you get involved in. But I would also add that one of the great things about the CMA is the people that you work with. Everyone is motivated to do the right thing, and it's a really enjoyable place to work. And I have really great colleagues at the CMA, which is another reason that it's hard to find something else that's going to give me such job satisfaction and to be working with such great people. So in this session, the team who organise and run the graduate scheme are going to tell you more about the scheme and the recruitment process, and you'll hear from some of our current graduates who will share their experiences so far. I hope you find it useful, and we hope that many of you in the audience will decide to apply before the window closes on the 6th of February. But please do ask questions as we go along. There is no such thing as a stupid question, and if you're thinking about something, somebody else probably is thinking the same. So feel free to ask your questions to get the clarity you need before you can decide if you'd like to apply. So I'm going to hand over to Paul now, I think. Thanks for listening.
Thank you, Anne. And Anne is somewhat of a post child of the CMA, of having had a quite impressive career here, starting as an assistant economist and working way up to being senior director in our antitrust group. I'm now going to hand over to someone who's not been here as long as Anne, but someone who I had the privilege of recruiting actually, and that's Louis Phillips, and he is leading on the campaign this year. So, Louis, can you tell us a bit about the scheme?
Thank you, Paul. Hi, I'm Louis Phillips. I'm a principal advisor in the Office for the Internal Market function. So that's the function of the CMA that provides advice to the governments in London, in Cardiff, in Edinburgh and in Belfast, essentially to ensure that trade between England, Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland flows effectively now the UK's left the EU. I joined the civil service about 6 years ago, straight out of university. I've been at the CMA for about four years of those 6 years. And I first worked in the advocacy team alongside Paul, and I've been at the Office for the Internal Market for about 2 years now. But as well as working in the OIM, I'm also on the team that coordinates the graduate scheme. And as Paul says, I'm leading the recruitment drive for the third cohort of our graduate scheme this year. So I'm going to say a little bit about some of the key points of the scheme, really, before we hear more about the recruitment process itself and some application tips. But for the scheme this year, we're recruiting for up to 10 positions. It's a 3-year scheme, but graduates on the scheme will be hired in permanent positions, and after the scheme ends, you will transition to permanent roles, essentially at the CMA. While on the scheme, graduates do 3 stints of 12 months, moving between different teams and different work areas of the CMA, and that gives you a good broad view, really, of what the CMA is about and the types of work that we do. This is a delivery graduate scheme, so there's a staff at the CMA typically in one of a few core professions, and the delivery profession is one of those. And the work that delivery professionals do is varied, really, across the different work areas, but all sort of in the common goal of delivering projects successfully. Our delivery professionals come from a variety of different backgrounds. Some have come from economics backgrounds, some law, some policy, some accounting, but some none of those things. And really the scheme is open to a diverse range of backgrounds. We've got 2 of our current graduates, Kirsty and Ting, who will talk a bit more about what they've done as delivery professionals to give you a bit more of an idea of the types of things you might do. On the scheme, you'll be supported by a structured training programme of courses, including the opportunity to do highly valued project management qualification in year 2, and funded for a postgraduate diploma and academic qualification in year 3. But more widely, the CMA has lots of opportunities to learn and develop, including our own know-how team that captures the work that the CMA does and best practice, and our internal academy team that runs training opportunities for people to learn new skills or indeed brush up on old ones. We also have quite regularly in expert speakers on a variety of topics, so ranging from competition law to policy and regulatory matters, to wider issues such as mental health, equality and race. And being part of the civil service, we get access to the wider training offered centrally by the civil service too. So there are loads of opportunities to learn and develop here, and that's really a core part of the scheme. Alongside all that, your development will be supported by a mentor and a buddy that you'll be allocated at the CMA as part of the scheme, and of course by your managers. The aim of the scheme is that after completing it, you'll be in a position and ready to apply for promotion to a grade 7 role at the CMA. So an example of a grade 7 role would be a principal case officer role. That's a competition specialist role and is again involved in the successful delivery of projects. And it's currently got a starting salary of £53,527. That gives you an idea of the sort of progression that you could make. as participants move through the scheme, the responsibility raises with each year, and that's about building you up really to that level where you're ready to apply for a grade 7 position. The last thing I'll say before handing back to Paul is that applications are open until the 6th of February. So that's the date that you need to have completed the tests and submitted an application form by. But Charlotte will say more about the application process and how that works a bit later on. So that's all from me. Paul, I'll hand back to you.
Thanks, Louis, and welcome to everyone else who's been joining us. We've been going through. So we've just heard from Louis Phillips there, who's leading the campaign. Then earlier we had Anne Pope, Senior Director. And just a reminder that the session is being recorded this afternoon, so we'll be posting it onto YouTube in the next few days, so you can watch back at leisure. And again, just to say, if you have any questions as we go along, drop them in the chat, and I'll be fishing them out. And if you want to raise any of them prominence, give them a like. So I'm going to head over and hand over, to Charlotte now, who works in our HR and recruitment team, who's just going to tell you a little bit about some of the process.
Thanks, Paul. So I thought it might be useful to provide a bit more detail about the recruitment process. So I work in the recruitment team. I've been with the CMA probably around the same time as Louis, about 6 years. So just to give a little bit more about the selection process for the campaign, we use the Success Profile Recruitment Framework in line with the rest of the civil service. And the elements that will be used in this recruitment process are behaviours, experience and abilities. And more detail can be viewed in the candidate pack, which is uploaded with the advert. The applications process, so much of this is explained in the candidate information pack, but just to note a few key things now for you. So the first stage of the process is to pass 3 online tests. So that's verbal, numerical and management judgment. Before you submit your written application, you must make sure that you allow enough time to do all of that before the closing date of the 6th of February. And we would really strongly recommend that you have a look at the practice tests available online. There are links included with the advert and the candidate pack. And it just gives you the opportunity to sort of. So if you pass all of those tests, you'll be required to submit a CV and personal statement. So for the personal statement, you need to review essential criteria outlined in the role profile, and you will need to evidence how well you meet each criteria in the personal statement. And if it works better, you can label each criteria as you're sort of writing your personal statement. At the sifting stage, you're going to be assessed and scored against how well you have demonstrated how you meet the essential criteria. So that's the skills, experience and knowledge that you're detailing. So just to reassure that your application is anonymised, and as you're building your application on the Civil Service Jobs platform, you will get prompts to sort of support you through this when you're completing your application. We do advise that when you're building your application that you think about using the STAR approach, and we do provide some information about this in the candidate pack. So that means situation, explain the situation, the task that you had to do, the action that you took, and what was the result. So generally, we're most interested in the action and result part. And so try to focus on what you did rather than we, for example, if it was a collaborated project. So those successful at the SIFT stage will be then invited to attend an assessment centre. So we're scheduling to do these virtual again this year. And the assessment centres they include a mix of assessments. Initially, you'll be asked to give a presentation and you'll be provided with the topic in advance. So you've got some time to prepare. You will attend an interview, a panel interview, where you'll answer some behavioural questions, and then there'll be some form of a written assessment as well, some kind of written exercise that you'll do on the day of the assessment centre. So all of this is assessed by CMA staff, so it's a fully in-house process, and we expect in fact all candidates to hear from us in April of the outcome of your application. There's more information about the assessment centre in the candidate pack. And again, think about preparing the STAR method for your interview responses as well. The final thing I just want to mention, and this is really, to really communicate with recruitment team. So if you require any support, if you require any reasonable adjustments to support you during the recruitment process, you can complete it on your application. So there is a section where it says assistance required, or you can email the recruitment team directly. And I think there's the email address, and I think there's a direct line, and a member of the team will help you. We want to make sure that you have the support, that you need to help you at every stage of the process. So I'm going to pause there and hand back to Paul.
Thanks, Charlotte. And there's someone who does quite a lot of recruitment at the CMA, and it's really important, I think, just to emphasise some of the points that Charlotte put in there about making sure you emphasise your role when you're answering those questions, and sort of, whilst we love to have collegiate colleagues, please do take the credit for your own work when you're answering the questions. Charlotte, I'm going to break my own rule as well. Actually, I'm just going to ask you a quick question because I have a few points coming in, just in terms of international students who are interested in applying. And we've got a question here about someone with only a 2-year graduate visa. Would they still be able to apply for the scheme?
So we're not offering visa sponsorship as part of the scheme. It is obviously a training contract. So I think that applicants will need to comply with obviously the civil service nationality rules, and they will need to have to have work eligibility for the duration of the training. It's hard to say without looking at people's personal situations in terms of whether they can be switched onto a skilled worker visa. So if anyone has a specific inquiry about that, more than happy for them to email it to the recruitment inbox, as much information as possible, and then we can respond from there.
That's great. Thanks, Charlotte. Okay, so I'm going to hand over now to Kirsty to have receive a bit of insight and her experience as being a member of the scheme.
Thanks, Paul. Hi everyone, I'm Kirsty. I joined the CMA in September 2021 as part of the first graduate cohort. So I graduated in 2019 after studying law, and I then worked elsewhere for about 2 years before applying for the scheme. I first heard about the CMA through EU and competition law in university, so I was fairly familiar with the work that the CMA does. I initially applied because I wanted to work somewhere where I could feel as though I was making a positive difference through my work. And I also wanted to work somewhere that would respect my work-life balance. So the CMA is a flexible employer in terms of how and when you can work. So you can work from home for 50% of the time, and many staff have flexible working arrangements in place. For example, some people work their hours across 4 days instead of 5. So since joining, I've experienced 3 different placements, and they've all been quite varied. My first placement was in the strategy team, and this involved quite a lot of drafting work. I worked on the drafting of the CMA's annual plan and the annual report for last year. And we also provided regular updates to the CMA's board on the CMA's portfolio of cases and provided advice on the CMA's progress against its objectives. So this provided a really good overview of the CMA's work across the various areas, and it also gave me quite good insight into the governance process. So the next team that I worked in was markets. So I worked on a market study into music streaming. This was quite different to my placement in strategy, as it involved project work. So I carried out project management tasks such as updating project finances, and I also carried out research tasks into the music market and into the various stakeholders that we were speaking to. And I also supported the legal team with contract review at one point. I found this case really interesting. I learned all about how the music industry works, and I also went on some great site visits to recording studios. So this year, since September last year, I'm in the digital markets unit where I work with the stakeholder engagement team. So this is centered around planning a strategy for engagement with stakeholders who have interest in the new digital markets unit. This includes large tech firms, challenger tech firms, policy groups, consumer groups, and parliamentarians, sort of lots of different types of stakeholders. So I identify relevant stakeholders, so people that we want to speak to, I reach out to them and facilitate the engagement. that takes different forms. So sometimes that means meeting them myself with other colleagues, or it might mean setting up meetings for a senior director or the CEO and making sure that they're prepared with all of the information that they need. This placement's been really interesting so far, as it's given me an insight into different industry perspectives on digital regulation, and it's also enhanced my understanding of issues within the market more generally. I'd say that in terms of the grad scheme as a whole, the best thing is being able to work across different areas and in different types of roles. It's really good for broadening your skill sets, as you can the things that you work on can differ quite a lot across placements. It's also provided a lot of learning opportunities. So, for example, on Friday, I sat an exam for a formal project management qualification, and next year I'll be doing the postgraduate diploma. And then outside of my day job, I also sit on the CMA's advisory committee, which is a committee that provides advice to the CMA's executive committee, which is a committee formed of the CMA's executive directors. So the CMA recognised that there's not enough diversity at senior levels in the CMA and created this committee. So we're a group of diverse individuals from various grades across the CMA who aim to bring diversity of thought to the senior decision-making process. And we do that by reading papers and going along to the committee meetings to give our perspectives on whatever they're discussing. So linked to that, I'd also just add that the CMA is a really inclusive employer. There's a number of staff networks to support staff covering a variety of issues, including race, LGBTQ+, dyslexia, mental health, and multi-faith. I personally am a member of the Race Network. There's lots of opportunities to get involved with these networks and make a real contribution to CMA's culture. So I'll now hand over to Ting to tell you about her experience.
Thanks, Kirsty. Hi, everyone. I'm Ting. I'm a first-year graduate in the Delivery Graduate Scheme, and I joined the CMA in September 2022, straight after graduating from university. I applied to the CMA firstly because I felt like I would be able to make a positive and meaningful impact to consumers, and second, because I felt like it would give me the opportunity to gain exposure to competition economics and how it is applied in real life, which is something that I was interested in because I studied economics at university. Like Kirsty, I'm also in the digital markets unit in my first rotation, but I split my time between two projects. So I work with the operational readiness team at the digital markets unit and also work in a market investigation. With the operational readiness team, I work with the digital markets unit, the recruitment and retention strategy. So the digital markets unit will soon have new powers to regulate large tech companies, for example, and we will need to expand our team. So my work involves, for instance, brainstorming ideas for outreach and recruitment campaigns and discussing them with the team, identifying events we can attend and organizations we can contact to reach out to potential candidates, and drafting proposals that we then present to more senior members of the organization. Working in the digital markets unit is also a great opportunity to learn and get involved in conversations about new technologies and their implications. For example, later this week, the team is having a discussion on AI and ChatGPT, which you may have heard of. And next week, we are attending a 2-day course on digital markets, which is organized by the Center of Competition Policy at the University of East Anglia. So while my first rotation is in the digital markets unit, I also get the chance to work with the markets group on a market investigation. And this involves tasks such as reviewing internal documents from companies that we will use then as evidence, arranging meetings and taking minutes of meetings where the case team presents evidence and analysis to an independent panel who will then decide what changes to make in the market to ensure that it is competitive. And then also, because the companies that in the market that we are investigating are multinational, the changes that we may propose might affect their operations in other jurisdictions and vice versa. So part of my job is to identify how changes or new laws in other countries might affect our investigation. Working in this case is quite interesting since I get the chance to learn about technically complex issues and then learn about regulation in other countries too. Apart from the projects that I'm working on, I'm part of the mental health first aid network, So last November, I had the opportunity to complete a 2-day training course on mental health first aid, where we explored how to navigate conversations on mental health and support people who may be experiencing mental health issues, whether that's in the workplace or outside. So it's great that the CMA offers these opportunities to learn and encourage having conversations about mental health, and shows that the organization really cares about staff well-being. There are also other social groups and forums at the CMA, such as the Sport and Leisure Committee, which organizes events such as quizzes and sports days, as well as a running club, choir, and stretch and sketch. In terms of other learning and development opportunities, as Kirsty said, I think it's great that the graduate scheme has a structured training program of both internal courses and external qualifications to build your understanding of the CMA and develop your skills, which I would say that's one of the benefits of the graduate scheme. So now I'll hand over back to Paul.
Thanks, Ting. And by coincidence, I actually spent my lunchtime attempting to sing with Liz, who's also on the call. We had a strong rendition of Any Dream Will Do. And if we get through all the questions, we might find ourselves having a go at that later. So that's us talking for now. So we've got some questions coming in, and we'll work our way through those. And right, let's have a pick through. So first of all, there's quite a few questions about whether or not there's any age restrictions or how long ago people have graduated from. And Louis, my understanding is there's no age restrictions, and essentially there's the requirements to have the degree of an expected 2-2, but other than that, no restrictions whatsoever in terms of who can apply.
Yeah, that's right. We've got a range of people on the scheme. Some have had careers of several years before joining it. Others have just recently graduated, but there's no restriction of that kind, no.
And I say at the end of this, we'll also take all of these questions and we'll be adding them to our sort of data bank of questions to make sure that if anyone wants just to have a bit of clarity, we'll have them there as well. We've got a question here about whether or not the 10 places are split by location. Can you say anything on that?
There are 10 positions across the two offices. I don't think we've got any sort of particular figure in mind for how that should be split. It would be based on really who 10 positions go to and where they're based, I think.
Yeah, no, that's it. It will come down to how many people that are successful. If you say that you want to be based in London, or you say you want to be based in Edinburgh, then that's fine. We don't have a particular sort of ratio in mind.
Cool. Thank you both. We've got a question here as well about someone who's an existing civil servant who's interested in microeconomics role. I like that word. And what are the benefits of this graduate scheme as opposed to applying directly for an EO or an HEO position on civil service jobs?
So the benefits versus, well, the benefit versus an EO role is that this is a HEO role, so it's a roll up. But against a HEO role, I suppose it's the way you move around the CMA and you see sort of different parts of the CMA's work and get a feeling for what we do and which bits of it that you like best, I think, really. So I think that's probably it in a nutshell, unless anyone else.
I think one thing I would add is that this is a delivery scheme. So if it's economics is your particular area of interest, then whilst there may be opportunity for you to work on some elements of economics or legal, primarily it is a delivery role, so we can't guarantee that. So I think if economics is like your absolute passion, that's what you're really interested in, I would think carefully about whether this is the right opportunity for you and whether something more economics focused might be better for you.
I don't know if Kirsty or Ting, you just had any reflections in terms of having gone through a few rotations and your own personal development, whether or not there's anything you'd like to add just in terms of the benefit of a development program over sort of being sat in one silo.
Yeah, I mean, so I'm happy to go first. I was a HEO in another government department before I started at the CMA, so I'm in a fairly similar position. I definitely agree that the main benefit is the rotation, so you get to experience loads of different placements, different teams, different types of work, and that for one, gives you quite a lot of experience in quite a short amount of time, and it also allows you to make decisions on what kind of work you prefer and where you want to sort of end up at the end of the scheme. And also the training, so the formalised training is another benefit. So sort of other HOs can apply for the training, but that sort of has to be approved and sort of go through an application process, whereas it's quite a formal structure on the graduate scheme. So you know from the outset what the training structure is going to be like and what qualifications you're going to get out of it.
Ting, is there anything else you want to add?
Yeah, I would like to echo like Kirsty's point on the training side of things. The graduate scheme has like a structured program, and so whilst there, some of the courses are like available to all HEOs, having a plan sort of guides your learning, and so you kind of know like what would be useful as an HEO to, which courses would be useful as an HEO to attend. And also would like to echo Liz's point on the microeconomics side. This is a delivery graduate scheme, and so while I do get the chance to listen to presentations that the economists do on the analysis that they're doing on our case, it is not necessarily the case that I'm involved in that economic analysis. So yes, just to echo that point.
Yeah, and actually we've got a question that's come in terms of, I suppose it'd be useful to unpack what is the delivery profession in the CMA. And so just for background, we sort of touched on it briefly early on, was there's different sorts of professional groups within the CMA. So we have legal service, we have economists, remedies business financial advisors who generally sort of finance accountancy people. And then we've got the delivery profession, who sort of a career pathway of sort of through project management, project directors. But I don't know, Louis or Anne, if you wanted to sort of unpack, what does delivery mean to you?
Shall I have a go at that first? So yeah, I mean, I see delivery as being the profession that really drives the project forward, and you do get involved in particularly having to understand the law and the economics, learn a lot and debate with economists and lawyers. I obviously have the economics background, which I think is super useful for the role that I do, but those professions perform more of an advisory role, whereas delivery are the people who have to actually make sure that we do get someone with the project and that we deliver a report or we issue a statement of objections. And so you're much more in the driving seat. I mean, I don't like the term delivery. It sounds like you're an Amazon driver or something, but it is, we've failed to come up with a better way of conveying what it is that we all do, because it is actually about making sure that the project hits its milestones, that everything is done. But you do get involved in the substance of the work. You're just doing it sort of from the perspective of trying to make sure that the project is successfully delivered, rather than sort of just saying, here is the economics advice about how the economics works in this market.
Thanks, Anne. Louis, anything more from you?
I mean, I'd agree with that. I think the point is that in delivery, you're involved in sort of every part and every stage of the project. So, from the very beginning, when you're sort of, I've worked on a report that we're publishing soon recently, and at the very beginning, from sort of gathering data at the beginning, right through to the end, where you've analysed the data, come to a conclusion, and you're going to actually publish something. You're involved at every stage, and I think that's the difference between delivery and sort of some of the other analytical professions, where they come in at different stages and have sort of inputs at different times. But in delivery, I think you're there sort of to see it through really from start to finish, and that's probably the most satisfying thing for me.
Okay, we've got a question about the travel involved and whether or not you choose the office throughout that you're based from. So my understanding is that you choose either London or Edinburgh, which are our two largest offices. We have offices across the nation and also in Manchester, and a very, very small one in Darlington. But you're based there throughout the scheme, but there's potential if you wanted to move between offices during the course of the scheme. Essentially, all of the CMA's functions are present in each of Edinburgh and London. And so you'd be working alongside colleagues physically in the office, but also, obviously, everything we do is hybrid now. But Louis, is there anything else on that you'd like to add in terms of location?
I think you've got it really in a nutshell. maybe opportunities to go between the offices during the course of the scheme, but you're based at the office that you select really. But I think you've hit the nail on the head.
Yeah, and just a similar question. We've got a point there about the departmental placements being tied to a specific location. As we've expanded our Edinburgh office in particular, pretty much everything is in both places. So some of the team you'll be sat alongside, others you'll be working through from teams. But actually, there's an opportunity to travel between the offices as well. I've just spent a few days in Cardiff with some of my team who are based there, and as restrictions have been relaxed, we've been finding ourselves going across the country and sort of meeting all of our friends we recruited over the pandemic as well. I have a very specific question here about how do you approach developing yourself and others' behaviour if you've never managed anyone before? I mean, from my perspective, I think you don't just need to think about managing someone. I think it's about working with people and helping your peers, but also working with people who might have managed you in any sort of situation. But so I don't know if there's any top tips from anyone who's answered one of these questions or looked at one before.
I think I'd agree. So any kind of teamwork or, I mean, you can take a leadership role without directly managing people. That might be in a sports club or sort of a social network at university. There's lots of different areas where you can sort of evidence that you contributed to particularly developing yourself, but also developing others. It doesn't necessarily have to be like a formal management experience.
Cool, thank you. And then we've got another question here about what type of skills and attributes you're looking for, and what should we highlight, or what should people highlight in their applications? So what skills are we looking for?
So there are some essential and lead selection criteria set out in the candidate pack, and those are the ones we're looking for in the personal statement. So the main eligibility criteria is that you have achieved or expect to achieve at least a 2-2 degree or similar equivalent. But then there are other selection criteria. So the two lead criteria are effective oral and written communication skills and the ability to undertake complex analytical work, including identifying and assessing a broad range of evidence and drawing out key conclusions and recommendations. And there are two further criteria after that. So demonstrable administrative and organisational skills that lead to delivering outcomes on time and to the required standard, and the ability to work effectively as part of a team, including through building relationships with internal colleagues or external stakeholders. So those are in the candidate pack. They're criteria that you need to cover in the personal statement. And after that, there are other aspects of the recruitment framework as well, behaviours and such at later stages.
Thanks, Louis. And I think I just emphasise that again, as someone who does quite a bit of recruitment, when we get a large number of applications and sifting through them, we need to people are looking against each of those criteria. And so you need to be making sure in your application you're hitting on each one of those and being quite clear and making it as easy as possible for someone reading the application to know what it is that you're trying to tie it to in the application. So another question here about whether or not it's useful to have a prior knowledge of competition law or economics. What do you think, guys?
I can add to that because I have a background in economics. I studied economics in university. So I guess it is useful because, for example, in the cases that we're working, when the economists present their analysis, then it's easier for you to understand it. And then you can also contribute if you have that background in economics. And also, for example, in the digital markets unit, we look into we're like thinking what areas in digital markets we should look into. And so having that economic background can help you because you understand sort of what features of markets might lead to markets not being competitive, and sort of having that understanding helps you and you're able to contribute with that economics background, if that makes sense.
Can I come in on that?
Yeah, sure.
Because there's a related question someone's put in about languages and humanities student. Would this non-economic background sort of count against you? And I think Ting is right. It's helpful to have an economics background, but I don't think it's in any way essential. I have a lot of people in my team who before they joined the OFT or the CMA had not done any law or economics, but they were interested in the work that we do. They have a slightly analytical mind. They're interested in the sorts of problems that we look at. But I wouldn't want anyone who hasn't studied law or economics to be put off from applying, because I think absolutely you can succeed at the CMA without that type of background. But I would encourage you to maybe do a bit more homework, really look at what the CMA does, read some of our reports, find out a bit more to put yourself in the best possible position, because we are aiming for diversity, and there are lots of aspects to diversity, and one of them is not just employing lawyers and economists, but having a broad range of people from different backgrounds. So I think it really is a scheme that is open to anyone, whatever they've studied. If you're interested in the sort of work that we do, and you think you like analysing problems and be interested in looking at markets and how they work.
Sam, the question about whether or not civil servants can apply. Yes, you can. Kirsty spoke earlier. She said it was a current civil servant when she applied. And actually, Kirsty, we've got a question to you. How well do you think your studies of competition law aided you throughout the application process? We've got someone who's doing an LLM in competition law and trying to work out how much to reference that in the application.
So I think I'd say only reference it if it is directly relevant to the question, because you sort of only get scored on what's being asked. So don't try and sort of put it in there if it's not relevant. I think I did speak about doing competition law a bit more interview, I think, just because it was relevant to one of the questions. But yeah, it's definitely not essential, as sort of Anne has just said. It's definitely not essential to have a background in competition law. I agree with what Ting said. I think it is helpful when you're on a case, because it helps you to sort of understand some of the issues being discussed and some of the work that's going on. But I'd also add that the CMA has quite a lot of training for people who don't have a background in law or economics. So they run introductory sessions to both competition law and economics of competition law. So if you don't have a background in those areas, then you can sort of develop an understanding through internal courses at the CMA. So yeah, I think, yeah, sort of to summarise, definitely talk about it if it's relevant, but I don't think you'll sort of get extra marks for putting it in if it's not directly asked for in the question.
I would echo what Kirsty has said. When you are doing your application, we want to hear about you. We want to hear about what you can do, what your experience is, and how you meet the essential criteria that Louis mentioned earlier that's set out in the information pack. Obviously, we want to hear that you are interested in the work that we do, but we don't want to read about how much you know about competition law, because that's not what we're testing, basically. So please don't spend loads of time trying to impress us with how much you know about competition law, because it won't really score you any marks, and you'll be using up your precious words. Just tell us about how you meet the criteria, basically. Make it obvious, use headings if you want to, so that we know exactly what you're talking about. Because when we're reading through lots and lots of applications, we don't necessarily have the time to think, to be generous and to think, oh, maybe this is what they meant, maybe that's what they meant. Just tell us and just be obvious, basically. It's the best advice I think I can give you.
So there's a question about whether or not we're looking for motivation in the personal statements. I think a bit of colour is helpful to understand where people are coming from.
Yeah, so I think, yes, that motivation, why you're applying, yes, we do want to hear a bit about that, but it can be a couple of sentences. It doesn't need to be more than that. But obviously, yeah, we want people applying that actually are interested in working here. So, yeah.
And just to go through, we've still got a few questions about sort of aspects on sort of permission to work and visa requirements, things like that. My understanding is if you have a right to work in the UK, you're eligible to be on this scheme. But if you do have a question like that, please do email the recruitment team and they can give you very specific advice, just to make sure there aren't any specific restrictions that you need to consider there. And we've got another question here about whether or not having better academic performance gives you an advantage in the recruitment process. So first of all our recruitment is institution blind, so those are removed out and stripped out, so you can't see which university someone's been to. So there's no, as part of our sort of approach to ensuring diversity. Grade is on there, but I don't think it's really a bearing beyond making sure you've clicked, the achievement of having the 2-2 there, or expected 2-2. Is purely there, just that filter, but isn't then considered. It's all about whether or not people are hitting those the scores on the essential requirements and the behaviours there. And then just going back to we had the discussion earlier, sorry, about the delivery profession and what a role of the principal case officer looks like. And so I think the simple or the complicated answer to that is it varies, doesn't it? And so we have PCOs operating across a few of our tools. So I don't know, Liz or Louis, do you want to jump in on what a PCO's life looks like?
Do you want to go first?
Yeah, so I'm in the Office of the Internal Markets. My title is Principal Advisor, but it's broadly the same thing. And I suppose it's project management responsibility for sort of some key aspects of the project that you're working on or the case you're working on. So you're likely to have some work management responsibility of other people while you're on the case. You might have responsibility for stakeholder engagement without sort of many other or senior members of the team present. You might sort of have responsibility, solo responsibility for drafting things that will be published. It's about, again, really sort of driving forward the case and projects and having a bit more, I suppose, management responsibility at the grade 7 grade, I think, in a nutshell.
Yeah, so I'm a principal case officer in our consumer protection team, and a lot of what Louis has just said applies to the role that I do. I'm working on a case on making misleading online reviews at the moment. My principal task currently is leading our sort of evidence gathering side, which means managing a small team, pulling together evidence we've got of misleading actions, submissions that we think we found on the parties' website, and then thinking about what we're going to do about that. What's the next step? How are we going to ultimately try to get the parties to change their practices? So yeah, there's sort of a lot of analysis, there's stakeholder management, there's team management, people management, but it really varies around the office, which is quite nice in a way, because you can in some ways slightly make what you want of the role, and if there are things that you're particularly good at, then very often you can kind of focus on that.
The question here about whether or not the CMA advertises any of the advisory graduate schemes during the year. So we don't, I think, have graduate schemes in quite the same way. We have interns both on the legal services and economic side, which gives a quite nice sort of foothold to then apply for HO role of, for example, assistant economists. But I don't think there's an advisory scheme unless there's one in legal.
There is a legal trainee scheme, and if you want to email the recruitment team, I'm sure they can send you details of that. I'm not totally familiar with how it works, but I think there are a few places each year for the legal trainee scheme.
Yeah, so that's a relatively small scheme compared to this.
But lots of assistant economist positions, but it's just not labelled as a graduate scheme, so it doesn't have quite the same structured approach, but there are quite a few roles for assistant economists.
And just in terms of the scheme, there's quite a lot of questions coming through about the third year study element. I don't know if you're able to sort of unpack what's available and different types of schemes. Would an LPC fit in that or not?
So there are a few options. They are essentially postgraduate diploma options. They're listed in the candidate pack actually as well, but the list at the moment includes postgraduate diplomas in EU competition law, economics competition law or consumer law from King's College London, postgraduate diploma in postgraduate laws from the University of London, Queen Mary University of London and UCL, Similarly, postgraduate diploma or extended diploma in strategic management and leadership from Sussex Business School, postgraduate diploma in management from the University of London and LSE, or postgraduate diploma in public management from the University of London and the SOAS. So those are listed in the candidate pack under the training there.
Sorry, Liz.
I was going to say, although that's not necessarily a hard and fast, like you can only do those. If there is a particular course that you want to study and you can make a strong case as to why it's relevant to the work that you do at the CMA, then we would consider that. LPC.
Legal practice.
Probably
certificate,
not,
I think
no.
no.
So I think there's a small number of people who've applied to do the LPC through a separate course, but it wouldn't be built into part of the graduate scheme, and would probably need to be done on the completion of that, and is subject to an application process and a business case. So, for example, someone in my team is doing it, but they're doing it actually as an economist and sort of branching out their skill sets. But yeah, so that would be separate to the actual scheme. So I'm just having a look through. So there's a question here about limited space for adding degree and grade. If you have multiple degrees, should you try and include all the information in the box or pick the most relevant one to discuss? So touching on just some of the comments before, I don't think you would need to worry about that. Particularly put your most recent one or your highest qualification there. But again, it's whether or not you've achieved that 2-2 degree or expect to achieve 2-2. There's a question here that someone actually, their university didn't provide expected degree grades, and how do they prove they meet the 2-2 criteria? What's the situation there?
I mean, I think they would apply, and then we would probably expect to see that they'd got a 2-2 by the time they started.
I think just to add to that, I was in a similar position, and I just sort of went off the modules that I'd got and sort of said what I was averaging, and then went off that.
And got a question: when is graduate scheme expected to start? A bit of information to share.
This is, and this correct me if I'm wrong, September of this year to start off.
Yeah. Okay. And then there's a question about in terms of I think how we mark the applications. Do you get marks for the skills that you should highlight, or the way they've written it, or is it a combination of everything?
Well, it's a combination of both, really, because put it this way, you could have the most amazing skills, but if you don't write it in a way that we can understand that, then we're not going to be able to award such high marks to you. And also, there is an element of awarding extra marks for somebody who has written particularly well. I mean, communication is one of the things that we are testing, and so we do want to see that you've got good written skills. It was touched on a little bit earlier around, I think it was Kirsty's point that if you don't have a work example to use, that's okay. We understand some of you are still at university. You may not have that many kind of work examples. That won't count against you. You just make the best with the examples that you've got, whether that's through work you've done with societies, or maybe some mentoring, or something that you've done in university or out of university. But try and just explain it as clearly as possible, and focusing on what you did and the outcome. What difference did you make, basically? That's what we want to hear.
And then, I mean, I think sort of touching on this a bit more, so there's a specific question about the essential criteria and analytical work, and whether or not previous research and dissertation research on quantitative and qualitative methods might be something useful to write about. I mean, I think that, yes, definitely. I mean, it
definitely is, but don't just tell us, oh, I did this dissertation on this, because that doesn't mean anything to us. You have to go into the detail of explaining all these really brilliant things that you did and how you used your analytical skills, and you did X, Y, and Z. You need to break it down for us, because just saying that you did a dissertation on something isn't going to be enough.
Yeah. And I think, just to echo the comments Liz made, we are looking, we want to help you navigate through the requirements. I've interviewed people who've used booking Glastonbury tickets for their friends as an example of being organised, and how they went about, orchestrating a trip for 25 people to get there, and who was going to get on Ticketmaster and that sort of thing. So, we are live to sort of using those sorts of quite wide life experience questions, particularly for people who haven't got much work experience. So do think about it. Also, I would say that if you have a search for the civil service behaviours as well, there's a guide from the civil service that explains those and what the different levels look like, and that might just help you sort of think about some of those parallel sort of ways of approaching them, and what the sort of key attributes you want to see from there as well. And just question, sorry, just popped in about whether or not there's a scheme aimed at economists. So I think we touched on this earlier. So there's not a graduate economist scheme. We have an economics intern scheme, which is a fixed term role. But many of those people who've secured internships then go on to get an assistant economist role. And then we have a quite strong record of developing and promoting people internally through that. But there's not a formal development scheme there. So we're going to wrap up shortly. I'm just having a quick look through to see if we've missed anything. As I say, all of this is recorded, and everything in the chat that we haven't touched on and everything we have, we'll just go through and sort of bunch up, and we'll be posting answers to those and putting those around later. The question here that we haven't touched on is about how does the mentor-mentee relationship work in practice? I don't know, Ting, can you share any insights, and then maybe Kirsty as well?
Well, I don't have a formal mentor at the CMA, but I do have a close relationship with my line manager and my line manager's line manager. And basically with them, I talk to them about any concerns that I have with my career or future plans for my career, any issues that I've been facing on my day-to-day work. And yeah, that's pretty much it.
Kirsty, do you have any experience in mentoring within the CMA?
Yeah, a bit, and I'd just say it's quite flexible, so it sort of works how you want it to, and you sort of get in what you put out. So if you sort of go to sessions with your mentor with specific issues or concerns that you're trying to deal with, then you can get some really good, useful information out of those sessions. I think quite often it tends to be a fairly irregular meeting, like monthly or even quarterly, but it's just that sort of regular check-in with someone who's probably a bit more senior, with a bit more experience, but who you don't necessarily work with, so they can sort of provide an independent view on any issues or questions that you have.
Yeah. And we also take part in cross-government mentoring schemes as well, so that gives you the opportunity to get involved with people. I mean, I've mentored people within the CMA during my career, and as Kirsty sort of says, it's you get out as much as you put in, basically. So it's about making sure that you understand what it is you want out of the relationship, and getting that advice from someone who might be a bit more established in their career. But I've also found it, sort of reverse mentoring actually to reflect on how I engage and manage, people earlier in their career, and sort of have that reverse relationship. So you say it's quite flexible, and we sort of recruit mentors and mentees through, and sort of periodically sort of rebatch people up as well. But we also have a few more informal things, like we have random coffees as well, where you put your name in the hats, and every month you get generated and paired up with someone in the office. So you might find yourself having a coffee with someone who does the filing, or you might have someone who is a chief executive. And every month is a different surprise, and gives you a great way of sort of building up those networks to meet people and sort of hear from their experiences that they've been through their career as well.
Just to add on that, Paul, the CMA has a mentoring program which anyone can apply to be mentored or to be a mentor themselves. We encourage our graduates to join the program, but obviously it's not mandatory, and it might be something that you want to wait a little bit. There might be a particular issue that you want to talk about with a mentor. So it's there for when you want to use it, basically.
Well, thank you everyone for joining. I think we'll call time at that. There's a few questions I haven't touched on just in terms of the work of the CMA, but I wanted to focus on the scheme itself. So find the application forms, hopefully on civil service jobs. You can also see other jobs the CMA is recruiting for. I, for example, am recruiting for a policy economist at the moment, a shameless plug there. But you can also see that just gives you a sense of actually the range of roles that, you know, once you progress through the scheme, where your career might take. I started in the CMA in the Remedies Business and Financial Analysis team and moved my way into advocacy, and I now do more of the external relations business facing role. So there's, you know, there's great amounts of flexibility there. And so again, thank you for everyone for joining. Hopefully this has been interesting, engaging, and just again, I'll repeat myself, it's going to be completely posted on YouTube, and we'll post all the answers to the questions as well. And any questions, just drop them to the recruitment email address on the pack. So thank you very much for joining us, and I hope to hear from you soon.